There we are. Good. Well, it's morning for me. I think it's afternoon for everyone back in the States. I hope you guys are doing all right. I am here with Professor Marandi. Thank you for joining me, especially considering everything that has taken place. Are you safe, sound? Are you okay currently? Everything good?
Yes, I'm safe. Thank you, Jamal, for inviting me. My family is safe. People, of course, are outraged that this is the second act of war that's been imposed upon them without justification. And first, the Israeli regime carried out an act of war unprovoked. And we now know that the United States was conspiring with the Israeli regime as it negotiated with Iran. So it was lying all the time. And then, as the Iranians had just negotiated with the Europeans, we saw the United States carry out this act of war against Iranians. And of course, US media, whether liberal or conservative, they're all the same.
Mm-hmm.
They are justifying aggression, they're justifying the tearing up of the UN Charter. The UN Charter, Jamal, was created in order to help the West and the United States in particular control the world. All these global bodies that are in the West, whether it's the OPCW for chemical weapons, the IAEA for nuclear programs across the world, all of the international bodies are controlled by the West. The
Yes.
IMF, the World Bank, these are all post Second World War institutions for control so that they can dominate the world, keep everyone else behind, benefit from the world's resources. And now they themselves are tearing them up and destroying them one by one out of desperation. And they're just exposing themselves for the brutal and ruthless warmongers that they are. And in this particular case, it's all for the sake of the Zionist regime. It's done, they're doing it for the sake of Netanyahu. They're sacrificing uh, global peace and stability for the sake of Mr. Netanyahu and his Zionist backers and his neocon supporters.
Can I put? Okay, I do accept that, but I've always taken the position that the Israeli government is just a stalking horse for the United States. That anything Israel is doing is effectively it's doing because of the United States. It's not a rogue actor. It's something that is a tool of U.S. policy, every bit as much as Ukraine is a tool of U.S. policy. Going all the way back for the last 20, 30 years, the ultimate objective was to overthrow the government of Iran. Is that the position that Iran takes? Or does Iran see Israel as a rogue actor and this attack by the U.S. to protect a rogue actor?
I know that this is a very old debate that has existed between between different intellectuals about the role that the Israeli regime plays in the United States, and does the dog wag the tail, and so on. I think the issue is Zionism. Zionism is something that exists in both Israel and in the United States. The Christian Zionist cult believes that Christ is genocidal. That's what they claim. Of
Right.
course, the Christ that we know, the Christ that you know, is totally against genocide. The exact opposite of what these Christian Zionists claim. So whether it's Christian Zionism or Jewish Zionism or those who support Zionism for the money, because they're extremely wealthy, the Zionist elites, and so many people work for them. They may not believe in anything, but they're still Zionists. And it's ironically these very same people who are in these cults, they're the ones who created ISIS and Al Qaeda. So or they support the Nazi and the neo Nazis in Ukraine and Eastern Europe. So we see the role that they play. It's not this is not a monopoly for Israel, or it's not a monopoly for inside the United States. I think it transcends borders. It exists in Europe, the United States, and Israel. It is a very dangerous and ruthless ideology or cult. Um, but therefore, in my opinion, it's not really about Israel controlling the United States or the United States controlling Israel. It's Zionists who are controlling policy in much of Europe, North America, and of course, playing an extraordinarily destructive role in our part of the world.
From my point of view, and I want to get your take on this plan to reshape the Middle East with American power, and as Israel effectively working with the U.S., taking down one government after the next, whether it was, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, leaving Iran being the last actor. Did Iran know, or did they believe that the United States was always going to get involved into the war?
Yes, without a doubt, of course. Actually, I would say very openly and clearly that Iran's ability to fight the United States is far greater than its ability to fight a war with the Israeli regime. Right now, Iran is winning the war against the Israelis. That's why they were so desperate, and that's why Trump came in to contribute to the war directly, because the Israelis are floundering. But the Iranian military doctrine has always been directed towards defending the country against a U.S. attack, especially after the United States took 9/11 and the United States took Afghanistan and Iraq. That is when Iran began to develop underground bases and drone programs and missile programs that go underground. Most of those bases are directed towards the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. They are directed against potential U.S. aggression, not against the Israeli regime. The Israeli regime it's nothing for Iran. It's completely dependent on the United States.
Exactly.
If this war continues for a few more weeks, you'll see what happens to Israel. But the United States is the real threat. And so Iran's defensive and offensive potentials in the Persian Gulf region and in the Indian Ocean are much greater than the potentials that are directed towards the Israeli regime. I think Netanyahu admitted that Iran had almost 30,000, I think between 20 and 30,000 long-range missiles that could strike Israel. It's more than that. But the missiles that the Iranians have that can be directed towards its enemies in the Persian Gulf and Indian Ocean are far larger in number, and they're far cheaper, and they're far more mobile, and they're far more precise because they are for shorter range targets. So the Iranians can launch them very swiftly. They can move them around very easily, and they can destroy their targets very rapidly. They will cross the Persian Gulf in seconds, in a minute or two. And the drones that Iran has that they prepared for potential conflict in the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean, they are the same. So the devastation that Iran can bring about on the other side of the Persian Gulf, on American bases or anywhere else, is far, far greater than the damage that they can do. And detecting them is far more difficult because they are small, they're mobile, and they're everywhere. So if, God forbid, there is war with the United States, and it is possible, because the Iranians are going to retaliate, Jamal. They are going to retaliate. And that the question is not whether Iran is going to retaliate. The question is what happens next. Because if the Americans go after the Iranians again, then we are moving towards the next stage. And all of those family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf that are bound to the United States, they're all glass palaces.
Excuse me, Professor, but you're already at war with the United States. And this goes to, I guess, my original question about Israel. Israel is, for all intents and purposes, working hand in hand with the U.S. in these attacks. And even the US intervention directly into the war has everything to do with protecting its client. Because as you point out, they are getting taken apart. And it seems that the strategy has been to effectively decapitate Israel and make it difficult to function as a colonial entity. And so, pursuant to that, I guess if that's the case, though, what's the strategy towards Israel? And then has that changed with the U.S. directly entering the war?
You're correct. The United States has engaged in war with Iran. It is using the Israeli regime and assisting the Israeli regime to murder Iranians, to slaughter women and children, to target civilian targets, as they've been doing every day. Every day.
Yes.
They've bombed the Tehran Red Crescent Society.
Yeah.
They've bombed hospitals. They've bombed ambulances. They've done everything. And the Western media says nothing about it. They only talk about a few injured Israelis, but they won't talk about the many dead Iranians that are specifically targeted by the regime and the many children that have been slaughtered. So you're right, the Americans are directly involved. But what I meant was that a sustained, ongoing battle between the Iranians and the Americans in the Persian Gulf region in the Indian Ocean. Because if that happens, that will be the end of the U.S. empire. It will be quick. It will be swift. It will be devastating for everyone. I'm not saying Iran will come out unscathed. It will be devastating for the world. Because when the oil and gas markets collapse, everything collapses with it. In that case, then you will see Ansarullah go into Saudi Arabia, and you will see Iraq go into Kuwait, and you will see the Iraqis shut down oil exports in Iraq, and they will say that the United States must give us our money back, because the oil that Iraq sells goes to an American bank, and they give a bit, little by little to the Iraqis in order to be able to put pressure on the government. So the mood in Iraq is anti-American now.
Yeah.
After all the threats made against Iran, after the death threats made against Ayatollah Khamenei. So if the United States and Iran are at war in the Persian Gulf, and Iran is hammering all these regimes across the board, what do you think Iraq will do? What do you think Yemen will do? And then in the Republic of Azerbaijan, where they are the dictator there is sending oil to the Israeli regime to help the Israelis, while the Israeli regime is bombing cities alongside the border, inside Iran. People in the Republic of Azerbaijan are increasingly getting angry. If war starts, it is not going to be simply between Iran and the United States. Those tiny family dictatorships, those vulnerable family dictatorships will be swept away. And these new forces in the region, in Iraq, in Yemen and elsewhere, they're going to be on the offensive. That will be the end of the U.S. presence in this region. So Trump, if he's sane, he will not take this route, because we don't want a regional war where the global economy goes down. But we're not going to allow the United States to strike us and to get away with it. That would be appeasing the aggressor, and it would only be an invitation for further aggression.
Right.
So the Iranian response will clearly happen. On the other hand, the Iranians will continue to hammer the Israeli regime. We saw it this morning. After the U.S. strike, Iran carried out a heavy attack.
Yes, you did.
And badly mauled the regime in different parts of the country. And they used one of the newer missiles this time around, which caused huge damage.
It seems that their capability to defend in the air defense is getting less. I mean, there was one missile that was fired, evaded helicopters, evaded air defense for like 30 minutes, and hit its target dead on. I guess my thing is, so the strategy is not to respond to the United States. The strategy is effectively to continue the attacks on its client, Israel.
Well, that will continue, but I have no doubt that the Iranians will respond to the United States, because they have to create deterrence.
Right.
Otherwise the United States will be encouraged to attack again. So they will strike. They will punish the United States. And I think President Pezeshkian just said that. He went to the streets, and there was a huge crowd in Revolution Square and Ghalab Square, and he said the Americans are going to have to accept being hit back, and they will hit them back. But the focus will remain on Palestine. If the United States is smart, it will take its punishment and step aside and pretend that everything is fine. If it's stupid and foolish, and Trump is a fool, then it will go after Iran. But as I said, Iran's military capabilities, its military doctrine, has always been focused on defending Iran against the United States. That is where its power lies. And so Trump, in his arrogance, he may not take this seriously. We're brown people, and so on. He may think, oh, we'll defeat them. But I think he should go and ask some of those Israelis on the streets of Tel Aviv if things are going well.
That's assuming they're there. They've been hiding in sewers and bomb shelters for the last 24 hours, or for that matter.
Yeah, and by the way, they always say that, well, the Hamas and Islamic Jihad are using people as human shields. All of their anti-air defenses are in streets and where people are living. They're among like right beside people's homes. Why doesn't Western media say that they're using people as human shields? The hypocrisy in the West, in Western media, whether it's MSNBC or Fox News, it doesn't make any difference. They're all the same. They just have a different way of putting it. Whether it's the Times in London or the Guardian, it doesn't make a difference.
Yeah, you would never get an honest exchange, which is why I didn't understand why Pezeshkian went to speak with the Europeans. They were pointless endeavors. I want to go for a separate.
Yeah, but I think there's a broader reason for that. Iran also wants to show the international community, the global South, that we're the responsible actor, that we're the ones who were negotiating in good faith, that we're the ones who are looking for solutions, and that is not going unnoticed. Right now, across the global South, people support Iran. I would assume where you are, people are not supporting Israel and the United States, and they're supporting Iran.
They're not.
Exactly. So Iran wants to strengthen this. It wants to show, on the one hand, its power, but on the other hand, it wants to show the world that, look, we want to sort this out. It's the Americans that are negotiating yet stabbing us in the back. It's not that the Iranians don't know this. The head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the United States, he spoke today and said the Iranians were caught completely off guard. They didn't know the attack was coming. I was on 3 different spaces, X last night, 11:30 to 12, 12:30, 11 to 11:30, 3 in a row, different groups. I just decided to do these spaces. And I said in each and every one that an attack is imminent. Anyone can go right now and go and check. And all 3, I said, an attack is imminent. I'm an ordinary Iranian. I'm not in the government. I'm not in the military. I knew that it was imminent. So for him to say that they were caught unawares, it just shows that this is propaganda.
Yeah.
They're claiming, they don't even know what happened underground or not. They're not there. But they just say it was completely successful. The Iranians were caught off guard. We are fantastic. But I seem to vaguely recall, they were saying the same thing about Yemen, which is infinitely weaker than Iran. They're being destroyed. They're being diminished. They're on their knees. They're begging for us to stop the attacks. And then what happened? Then Trump capitulated. So we shouldn't take anything that Trump or his generals or his servants say in public. Seriously, we
a couple of days ago, they said you were running out of missiles. And I remember with the Russians, they were saying the Russians are fighting with shovels. The Russians are running out of missiles. All this nonsense. Yeah. And by the way, I have a video where I said an attack is imminent. I remember hitting Latha it was hours before I said, there's something brewing. Something is happening. They're not as clever as I think they are. And, when you are a habitual liar, nobody really takes you seriously in that regard.
That's right.
I totally agree with you. But from a strategic sense, though, this is the point. Like the United States wanted to get into a direct conflict with Iran. The United States has attacked the nuclear sites and and they're on TV making the argument that invading Iranian airspace, viciously and unprovoked attack on nuclear sites is not really escalatory and not really an attack. It's just nonsense. I guess my thing is, if the entire point is to get Iran on the escalatory ladder where Iran makes a response and the US makes another response, with the objective of trying to divert attention away from Israel, is that something that how does Iran deal with that? I mean, it seems that the entire point of this is to get onto this escalatory ladder with Iran, where the US gets more involved in the war in a way that it, I would imagine, in his own mind, justifies getting involved into the war.
Well, there is a balancing act here that exists. And the Iranians obviously would like to focus on putting the Israeli regime in its place. However, if Iran doesn't strike back, that would only encourage the American regime, the Trump regime, to do it again.
Agreed.
And we see the Europeans and Western media, all of them, defending Trump. Even those who hate Trump, they'll defend it. When it comes to us brown people or, non-Western or anyone that stands up against their colony in our part of the world, they will demonize us.
Yeah.
They will support him. Remember, in 2016, when Trump was elected, he was a Putin puppet and a stooge for Russia. But as soon as he started launching those missiles against Syria, everyone said he's our president today.
Yeah.
That is who these people are.
Yeah.
So Iran has to make sure that the United States understands that there are consequences. The question is, what does the United States do after that? But again, that goes back to what we were saying earlier, and that is that the Iranian military doctrine is focused on defending the country against the United States. And the United States is extremely vulnerable to Iran. All you have to do is look at all the tankers and the oil and gas installations. People speak about shutting the Strait of Hormuz. That is not even necessary. If someone just sinks the tankers or destroys the installations, who needs the Strait of Hormuz anymore? So Iran has so many options. If the United States therefore takes the foolish route, then it's going to end very badly. But what Iran wants is to punish the regime in Washington, create deterrence, and focus on the Israeli regime until it recognizes that it made a catastrophic mistake by initiating this war.
What does that mean? At what point does Israel recognize that they've made a catastrophic mistake? Where is that level? Because Iran has said you're not negotiating with Israel. So is that to the point where Israel is fundamentally defunct, destroyed? Is that a level below that? Does Israel exist after this? What is and I know you're not in government, but I am curious about what that means.
Well, the absolute destruction of the Israeli regime for Iran means apartheid South Africa. That is what Iran means by destruction.
Yeah.
This war of physical destruction was initiated by the regime.
Yes.
The genocide in Gaza, the genocidal war in Lebanon, the genocidal attacks on Iran, these were initiated by the regime. Iran wants the regime to end like apartheid South Africa. Are there whites in South Africa? Yes. Are there blacks in South Africa? Yes. Are there people of color in South Africa? Yes. That's as long as they're all South Africans and they all have the right to vote. That's there may be. I'm sure we all know how problematic South Africa is. I don't want to go into that issue, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and all that. I don't want to go. That's not the point. The point is that the Constitution sees everyone as equal human beings.
I see.
That is what Iran means by bringing down the Zionist regime. It's dismantling this system of systematic racism and ethnic cleansing, something which Europe supports. So the reality is, Jamal, the West supports racism, ethno-supremacism,
yes,
ethnic cleansing, and genocide. And Iran opposes it. And for that reason, for the last 40-some years, Iran has been demonized. Iran is evil because it opposes this. And how do they pretend to people that this is not the reality? They say Iran wants to, to wipe Jews off the face of the earth or whatever, the language,
Yeah.
the language they use. They lie in order so that people will look to Iran and believe their lies and say, well, no, they're the bad guys. But the reality is that Iran, from day one of the revolution, day one, Iran has been saying Israel must cease to exist as this just like apartheid South Africa must cease to exist. Did we slaughter everyone in South Africa? No. It ended with the collapse of the regime in elections. That is what Iran wants for Palestine. But this for the West is outrageous. And the propaganda machine will tell people a very different story, as they've been saying for the last 4.5 decades. But now people are seeing the reality. They're seeing what this regime really means. And they see what Western regimes really are. When the Israeli regime attacks Iran unprovoked, the West says they have the right to defend themselves. So if someone comes up to you with a baseball bat and hammers you in the head, and someone says, well, he had the right to defend himself.
Well, I think
people are yeah, and the world sees this, Jamal.
Right?
In Europe, they may hide, through narrative building, they may still fool some people. And I'm sure that in the United States, some people are saying, cheering on war as some people do in the United States. That's the United States after all. But across the world, people are seeing right through the Western narratives.
Yes.
That they are justifying aggression and calling it defending itself. It is completely dystopian, but people see it. They recognize it. And this is the biggest failure of the West. The emperor has no clothes.
No, I agree with you. I think this is one of those situations where the world stands by Iran. I mean, we have watched in horror as a genocide take place and nobody did anything. And not just did anything, the Western governments backed it, paid for it, tried to justify it. And you have Iran effectively standing up for humanity. I have a larger question on this one. From my point of view, this is about empire. That I would say the white Western world, Europe and the United States, its colony in the European sense, its client in the United States sense, they feel their power slipping away. And if things continue as they are with things like BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, China, Russia, Iran, India, etc., that the share of the economy that they have now is just going to expand. The defensive capabilities are going to expand. And they feel multipolarity coming into fruition. They tried to go after it with Russia using Nazis in Ukraine. And when that didn't work, they seem to have pivoted over into the Middle East, going after Syria, taking down Syria, and then getting the opportunity to go after Iran. Does Iran see it that way? That this is on some level a proxy fight with powers of the empire backing Israel, with these other forces of multipolarity, be it China, be it Russia, potentially even Pakistan in this case, helping and assisting Iran?
The Russian president said something like that, I think, yesterday. He said the forces that are behind the fight against us in Ukraine are the same forces that are fighting against Iran.
Exactly.
If paraphrasing. So it is true. It is a declining empire that's collapsing, and it's ironically pushing forward its collapse through its irrational violence and its irrational and half mad and often completely mad behavior. And so, it's sort of like when they, if you see someone is drowning, although we'd rather have the empire drown, but if you see a human being drowning, they say never approach that person from the front, because they will jump on you and lash, and then you could drown with that person. So they say go from the back. And anyway, the empire is drowning, and it is trying to take down everything with it. Ironically, it is speeding up its destruction by destroying the same institutions that it created after the Second World War. The rules-based order was created to preserve Western domination.
Yes.
And now one by one, they're discrediting all of those institutions. They're tearing up the international law altogether, and the UN Charter, of course, and they're discrediting the IAEA and all other bodies. But these bodies were all created for preserving their power. So, for their own short term foolish policies, they are themselves wrecking and hammering at those institutions that preserve their power.
Foreign Minister Argachi is supposed to be going to Russia to either, well, I don't know what time it is there, but basically either today or tomorrow to have a conversation, I guess, on issues of strategy. And considering this is an issue of empire, will there be coordination of action in this case? I mean, Putin was very annoyed because, let me say it this way. There are people like me, there are other people who have watched the Middle East go down in flames that are very concerned about what is happening in Iran, not just for your health, but all of their health. And the last thing we want to see is anything happen to Iran that happened to something like Syria or Libya or Iraq, etc. And so there's been a huge amount of frenetic energy screaming at Russia and screaming at China, saying, help, what are you doing? Why are, this also directly affects you. What are you doing? Now, Putin kind of pushed back on that, effectively saying, look, what do you expect us to do, right? Iran is a sovereign country. But is there coordination between Russia, China, and Iran, considering this is an issue of empire where all of the West, NATO countries, in addition to the United States, effectively helping and assisting Israel? Or is Iran going it alone in this?
No, Iran is not alone. Of course, Iran is doing the heavy lifting by far. And I would say very openly and clearly to your audience, Iran is the hope of humanity. And I think that the Americans have shown this to the world. And they've shown that over the decades they've been lying about Iran. But Russia and China are very worried. They see the United States and the Israeli regime just provoking war, carrying out war, and the Europeans saying that they're defending themselves unprovoked. Of course, this is something that's going to create deep concern across the global South. And so what the Americans are doing is that they're going to definitely draw the Russians and the Iranians and the Chinese and many others closer to each other. And Jamal, even the Turks, even Erdogan, who is, as you know how I feel about him. He's a traitor, and he's in the Western camp, and he's been helping the Israelis all this time get away with these atrocities against Palestinians and elsewhere. But even they are now afraid of what the Americans and what the Israelis and what the Europeans are doing. Even the Saudis are afraid. Even the region is now afraid. So while they've been collaborating with the West during this period, they now see that the West is completely out of control, and that they're willing to do anything. They have no red lines, nor of course the Israeli regime doesn't either. So this is creating a deeper divide between the West and the rest of the world. We'll have to see how it plays out, but I'm optimistic about the future. It's going to be painful and tough, and we're at the forefront of war. But I think that more and more people are awake today, and more people are pushing to have an impact in their own countries to bring about change.
Please allow me two more. Are you concerned that this pulls in other countries in a direct way, where this leads to something like a third world war?
Yes, of course. Jamal, I said earlier, after Iran punishes the Americans, if the Americans carry out aggression again, and there is war in the Persian Gulf, the Iranians will hammer everything. They will destroy everything. But what will happen? You will see actors like Iraq, which are far more powerful than these tiny Arab dictatorships. You will see Yemen, which is far more powerful than Saudi Arabia. When these regimes are all in trouble and the Americans are in trouble, they'll move in. The borders will change. Everything will change. And the global economy will collapse. So when the global economy collapses, imagine what life will be like throughout the world. People will lose their jobs. People will be on the move. This will be worse than the Great Depression. It would be significantly worse than the Great Depression, and it will be global.
Last question. Medvedev pointed out that, they need to be aware because other countries would be willing to hand Iran a nuclear weapon. Now, suppose he's saying this because Israel is a nuclear power that apparently nobody cares about, weirdly enough. And the US, of course, is a nuclear power. There's been a analyst that pulled a stat from somewhere that there's a 50% chance of Iran getting nuked. That seems pretty amazing to me, but okay, let's go with that. As opposed to the Samsonite option where they just kind of take their luggage and leave. Is Iran concerned that Israel, being a nuclear power at the end of it all, if they are getting taken apart, that they're willing to use nukes?
First of all, the objective is not to wipe Israel out in a military way. It is to end the regime.
Agreed.
But by hammering the regime in this war, it is going to weaken it to show Israelis that this is not going to work, that this is not the way forward. You will never feel safe colonizing, so find a different solution. Many will leave because who wants to stay there, especially if you can get a job elsewhere, if you're educated. Israel is going to fundamentally change after this. So the objective is not to kill everyone. That's never been Iran's objective. Iran never, just like, again, going to South Africa, that's the model in the broader sense.
Mm-hmm.
Social justice and all that, that's a different issue. But the model where everyone is equal as a human being, that's the model.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so your point is that
I would add that Iran, Jamal, when it comes to the nuclear program, technologically speaking, Iran is ahead of Pakistan and ahead of North Korea. Iran has chosen not to develop a nuclear weapon, and we've discussed this in the past before. Now, many people are against this. My own children are against this. They argue with me about this. I still believe that a nuclear weapon is not a good thing because it creates the incentive for everyone to develop one. But then again, who knows what will happen in future? But what I would say, I mean, who knows what will happen in future because of the stupidity of the Americans and the Israeli regime. But what I would say, though, is the significance of what Medvedev said is in the fact, is not the literal words that were written, and this is the sentiment that the world is disgusted with the West and the Israeli regime. That statement, that written text by Medvedev, all the specifics aside, what does it tell you? It's saying the West is stupid. The West is foolish. The West is pushing the world to everyone closer to each other to stand up against the West, and that is happening.
Just to be clear, though, a country that has murdered 100,000 people, that has invaded one country after the next, that has starved millions, you don't believe that that country is willing to use nukes. They've crossed every other red line, even if it's not this notion of the destruction of all of Israel, just the notion that the state has fundamentally changed. Could be.
Yes, but if the Israeli regime goes in that direction, the world will take it out, because that would, the world won't tolerate that.
Professor, we have watched them tolerate. We've watched them tolerate a genocide.
No, that's different. Well, we have to. This is a very complicated issue, but the objective for Iran is the dismantling of the regime.
Right.
If the regime seriously contemplates using a nuclear weapon, after all, but even the question itself that you've posed and others have posed also to me show how ruthless and barbaric and backward the West is. That these questions could actually be asked. Yeah, exactly. Western leaders and Western elites, how disgusting and despicable they are, that these very questions can be raised. But if that danger arises, then obviously Iran will move in a direction to preserve its existence. But also, the rest of the world will do the same because a nuclear weapon is a threat to the world. And I don't see the Israeli regime surviving under, if it moves in that direction.
Professor Mohammed Marandi. He is a professor of English literature at Orientalism at the University of Tehran. Professor, I have several chats of people saying, please be safe. Please be safe. And look, I wish you well.
It's not all up to me, but I'll try my best.
You have a good one. Thank you for this. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye for now.
All right. Let's see. I can put this. Professor, I'm going to end this here, and I'm going to go back to the audience. Thank you for this. You be safe, okay? Bye-bye. All right. All right, guys. I thank the professor for his time and attention. I'm freaked out by this, to be honest. I want him to remain safe. It's a war. I suppose we're at war. Let's go to the chats. Israel isn't a rogue actor, Jamal. USS Liberty would like to chat with you. Okay. Tell me something. Tell me this. If the US is not giving Israel 80% to commit the genocide and wage the war, if it's not giving it the bombs, the bullets, if it's not giving it political support in these hearings, like basically arguing that Israel has the right to starve 2 million people, if it wasn't protecting it in UN Security Council, does Israel exist? The answer is no. So the notion that Israel could do anything without US consent seems nonsense to me. The US has a policy position. The policy position is to reshape the Middle East with American power. That policy position just so happens to dovetail with this notion of greater Israel, in which case they work in tandem for it. But at the end of the day, Israel can do nothing without the US support. As I keep saying, the air that Israel breathes comes out of the ass of the United States. And so it's not a tail wagging the dog. The dog is perfectly wagging the tail. Will there be, let's say, divergences? If they are, of course, it's going to lend towards the United States. Now, you can say that the U.S. is a captured audience. Maybe. But let's also be clear that everything that is happening falls perfectly in line with the U.S. foreign policy, going all the way back, since the first Bush administration, second Bush administration. So no, I don't have this notion that they're a rogue actor. From my point of view, everything that is happening is perfectly in line with U.S. policy. The objective was to get into a war with Iran. The objective was accomplished by getting into a back and forth in regards to Israel attacking Iran. The U.S. comes in trying to protect its client when it finds out that its client can't carry the burden, with the notion of potentially getting into an escalatory ladder going back and forth where the U.S. gets further ensconced into the war. Now, we will see if some of the reporting was right about it's once off. I'm skeptical of that. At the point where the colony is being taken apart, I strongly suspect that the U.S. is going to find any pretext necessary to get further involved. But we'll see. I don't know. But no, I don't believe that they're, I don't believe the rogue actor stuff. God, please protect Professor Marandi, Dark Bushida. Your mouth to God's ears. Your mouth to God's ears. Kareen, I know I say this all the time. You look so much like my ex-wife. It's freaky to me. I'm praying for you, Professor. We worry about your health and mental health. Stay safe. He is a strong man. He has been through war once before. In that war, he was fighting with arms. In this one, he is fighting effectively, trying to communicate reality to a Western audience that would never get that reality under normal circumstances about what is actually taking place. So he's a strong man in a sense, but I agree with you. I worry about his health. Flying Boar. Netanyahu wants Iran to retaliate so that the United States could get involved on the side of Israel. Iran should stay focused on Israel. Yes and no. It's complicated. And this is kind of the line we were talking about before. If you don't respond, it effectively allows the US to believe that it can attack you without you responding. The US would always say that they attacked you for some kind of reason and that you responding to them is escalation, as if bombing and invading a country and bombing unprovoked facilities and infrastructure is somehow not escalation. It's nonsense. Stuff is just propaganda. It's shallow. It's not even good propaganda, right? I agree with you in one sense that if the objective is taking apart the colony, the client state, then you focus on the client state. This was kind of the question that I posed before. If you're looking for parity, where you're attacking Israel up into the point where you believe this is the subjective line where we find parity, you attack me, you step on the ladder. I take a step on the ladder. If everybody stops, no more attacks have to take place. But of course, the entire objective could be to get you on the ladder in the first place. So when you make any response, if you spit bubblegum at them, they say, oh my God, we're bleeding. In which case you need to take another step on the ladder, forcing Iran to take another step on the ladder. To your point, the entire goal of that is to get the US further ensconced into the war in a way where you've split concerns between the United States and Israel, as opposed to them being able to focus on Israel. As I said, it's complicated. I don't know how you walk that line. I suppose we'll find out. That is the line, or that is the reality of Iran, what they're facing right now. How do you do that? Do you go after Israel and take them apart, leaving the main concerns of the United States away until a later date? Okay, well, that gets a little dicey. The US may take that as a license to hit you again under some nonsense pretense. I mean, they're already talking about the space program. It's like, well, why do they have a space program? They're trying to put missiles in space, so we need to hit them on that now. So I hope you get my point. The entire point is for the US to get ensconced into the war. They're going to do it either way. So whether you strike back, which is your right to do so since they've invaded and attacked you, or whether you focus on Israel, at the end of the day, do you honestly believe that if Iran is taking apart the client, that the US is not going to get involved? Especially considering that the reason that the US got involved in the first place is because Iran was taking apart the client. The nuclear weapons was always just a stalking horse to try to take down the government. Israel couldn't do it and got embroiled into a war that they are losing. Hence, the US asserts itself. We'll see. We'll see. It is interesting to hear how Iran thinks about it. I'm not going to keep this long because it is, Jesus Christ, it's 1:30 in the morning here. Look, thank all of you for joining me. We have a really good crowd. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe, and I will see you bright and early in the morning. Have a good one all. Be safe. Talk to you tomorrow.